very. So my attempt to make Aliyah didn't work out. And except for a brief trip in 1985, I didn't visit Israel again until 2013. And in the intervening years, I did photojournalism and documentary photography, both of Jewish and non-Jewish subjects. My Jewish work took me to Cuba and Ireland to photograph the tiny Jewish communities in those countries. And I did a project on Jewish poverty in New York, something that people told me didn't exist. I also did journalism for a number of Jewish publications, both in the United States and overseas. And more recently, I did the photography for a historical guidebook to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I'd always meant to go back to Israel, but somehow the timing never quite worked out. On my first trip back, after so many years, I found a modern, vibrant country that still retained many of the characteristics that I remembered from when I was a young man living there. I was fascinated by the diversity of people and cultures that make up 21st century Israel. Everywhere I turned, there was something that caught my eye and called out to be photographed. I worked in the streets, marketplaces, and homes with my quiet, discreet Leica camera and black and white film, photographing in a fluid, fast-moving documentary style. I was returning to Israel every year around Sukkot before the pandemic hit to photograph and to see family and friends. And I've had several exhibits of my work there. Hopefully, I will get back to Israel this fall. It's been a while, and even from year to year, things changed, and it'll be 3 years by the time I get back. Anyway, that's a little bit about me and my experience in Israel. So let's go to the photos. If we can get to the photos. Vanessa, we're having a slight technical glitch here. What have I done? There we go. I'm fascinated by
It's not on Zoom.
What happened to the share?
Yeah.
So what is it showing?
It started.
It says my screen sharing is paused.
Margolis, you think if some of the lights could be turned off, it'll bring out a little more contrast?
It's possible. If someone knows how the lights work.
Sure, 1 second, okay.
Yeah, okay, so that's fine. We're working on it. It's another technical issue. The lights will be reduced shortly.
How's that?
What do you think?
It's your program, sir.
Okay. I try to please the crowd.
I try to make your program even more enhanced.
Okay, thank you. Nothing? So somehow I got bumped out of Zoom, I think. So the post attendee thing, so I'm going to come back in. Mhm. What's that?
Why did you go to Israel? Oh, no, you gotta stay by the microphone. Sorry. So since we have a multi-access program.
You
why
got
don't
let me
speak,
in.
And for also people here can't hear, well, just raise your hand and I'll come, and we have microphones. And then, Paul, you need to stay here. Usually when I speak, I like to run all over, but we can't do that anymore. Okay.
Do you see me?
Yeah. I can't even stop your show.
And what are you seeing? Sorry. Yeah, no, I
Now it's up. Now it's there.
on Zoom.
On Zoom. Take your phone.
No, it'd be fine. Okay, now at home? Both places? Okay. Funny part is, so is that the first picture?
Yeah,
All right, so you can start talking about it and I will,
okay, so you're going to advance.
yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, everybody, after a brief technical interruption, we're ready to go forward. As I was saying, I'm fascinated by the older parts of Jerusalem and Mahane Yehuda Market, and I keep going back to those places to photograph. There's a timeless quality to so much of Jerusalem, and I can feel the weight of history there more than almost any place else in Israel. I believe that I've done a lot of my best work in Jerusalem, so this presentation is somewhat weighted towards those pictures. This is a woman buying bread in Mahane Yehuda Market, and the scene makes me think of what markets in the shtetls of Eastern Europe must have looked like, or in the Middle Eastern cities where Jews once lived.
That should be a light for you, but
Oh, no, I'm fine.
okay. All right.
As long as we keep the slides advancing.
Yeah.
As long as we keep the show in progress, we're good. Next one, please. This gentleman is a bedding merchant in Mahane Yehuda Market. And he was lighting up the stub of his cigarette, and I asked if I could photograph him. Next one. A discussion in a pastry shop. They might have been talking about the price of pistachios or arguing over politics. Next. A guitar player near David's Tower outside the walls of the old city. He was playing for tourists and entertaining the two yeshiva girls with his combination of guitar and breath-powered instrument. Next one. Lunch delivery in the Arab quarter of the old city. I admired how this guy could balance the tray and make his way through the crowded streets of the market there. Next one. So border guards and tourists in the old city. This picture is from November of 2015 during the stabbing and shooting attacks that were going on at the time. We were advised to stay out of the old city, that it was too dangerous. And when we debated whether or not to go, finally decided we weren't going to be scared off. We'd come to Israel, we were going to see it, we were not going to be scared off by the very slight possibility of violence. Besides, I had promised a devoutly Catholic colleague of mine that I would get her rosaries from the Holy Land. And she'd given me $100 bill and told me that her chevra of women who she prayed with would pray for my continued health and safety. So it seemed like a pretty good deal to get her rosaries. And my companion has a longtime friend who runs a Christian religious article shop. So we went to him and he gave us a pretty good deal that $100 bought a dozen rosaries. Next one. An olive seller. This guy didn't understand why I wanted to photograph him. He said, I'm no movie star, but he was gracious enough to indulge me and let me photograph him and his wares. Actually, he did become sort of a star. This picture was made into a 10-foot high banner that was used to advertise one of my exhibits that was held in Los Angeles. So in his small way, he did become a star. The next one. These are Christian pilgrims on the Via Dolorosa. And walking through the old city, I came across this group of Asian Christian pilgrims carrying a cross and making their way along the route that Jesus took to his crucifixion. I was very curious about how much it costs to rent a cross and what sort of deposit you have to give in order to do that. It's a Greek Orthodox priest also in the Christian quarter. And not yet. That all of you have heard the anti-Israel rhetoric that denounces the country as being a white European colonialist, I'm sure several other things. Although I knew from my trips there that it's really a very diverse place, ethnically and otherwise. Before the trip that we made a few years ago, I contacted a friend who works with schools and social service organizations and told them that I wanted to photograph a school with a diverse mixture of children studying and playing together. He got me into the Guatemala school in Jerusalem, where I spent a few hours photographing the kids. And this image is one of my favorites. The four girls ignored me and just started talking to each other, braiding each other's hair, just being what little girls do. And one you can see is Ethiopian, one Mizrahi, and probably the other two are Ashkenazi. And speaking of the ethnic diversity of Jews, this is something called the Sigid Festival. This is an Ethiopian Jewish festival where about 15,000 Ethiopian Jews from all over the country travel to Jerusalem and gather on the Tayelet, the heights above the city. This holiday is unique to the Ethiopian Jews. It's sort of their version of Simchat Torah. I was particularly impressed that much of the security, the border guards, army, and police who were protecting the gathering of their people were also Ethiopians. And anyway, next one. This last picture in Jerusalem is a Scotsman who I photographed a few years back while he was waiting for a bus. He was in Israel to support his local football team when they played in Jerusalem and Haifa. He was proudly wearing the kilt of his clan. He was a friendly guy and didn't mind my taking his picture. And he was probably relieved to find a fellow English speaker. He said he liked Israel. People had been very warm and nice to him, but he was annoyed by something. People kept asking him if he was Irish. So it's in Israel, as probably not go back.
Oops.
We'll leave the Scotsman for a moment.
Okay.
That's our next.
Yeah.
Okay. In Israel, it's very easy and natural to strike up conversations, or rather have people strike up conversations with you and have them give you their advice or opinions, whether or not you want them. One evening, I was in Machane Yehuda Market photographing, and I saw this ultra-Orthodox guy and his daughter at a spice counter. And it looked like something out of 150 years ago. It was just a scene that absolutely out of the modern world. So I raised my camera to take a picture, and the guy saw me and started walking towards me. I thought that there's going to be some unpleasantness here. He's going to give me grief for photographing them. But instead, he started telling me in very heavily French accented English that he also had a Leica camera. It was the model after mine. And he regretted not having the time to use it anymore. Probably had 12 kids. And he'd apparently done photojournalism in France, reportage is the word. And we switched to my sort of broken French, which was better than his broken English. And I ended up admonishing him, telling him that a Leica camera it's a sin to keep one unemployed. That was our conversation. So let's move on. Moving on here to Tel Aviv and Yaffo. I'm not usually drawn to photographing newer parts of a city, and I look for those aspects that have survived into the 21st century. Old Yaffo appeals to me more than glittering Tel Aviv, and I tend to find my subjects in the midst of traditional architecture rather than modern streetscapes. So these are some of my favorite images from Tel Aviv. This is a street scene that's like a frozen instant in time, with the juxtaposition of the Hasid, the young woman on the bicycle, and the early 20th century buildings in the background. And somehow it just seems like a microcosm of Israel, or in that second in Tel Aviv. Next one. Israel is filled with people who have unique and unusual talents. And I've always been intrigued by performers, especially people who do things that I would never think of doing myself. This young woman is an aerial performance artist. She agreed to set up her rig, her ropes and pulleys in a tree above the pedestrian promenade of Rothschild Boulevard, so I could photograph her. She was quite happy hanging there like a bat for extended periods of time. At one point, she sat up on the rope and sipped from a cup of coffee about 6 feet off the ground. Next, please. Sheshbesh in Yaffo. In front of an antique store, these two gentlemen were absorbed in their game while waiting for customers that probably never came. Business must have been slow that day, or maybe there wasn't much demand for the life ring, searchlight, or the other treasures in the shop. But however, in other parts of the city, things are somewhat livelier. Okay. On Friday afternoons, when nobody works in Israel, it's the time for birthday parties. And we stumbled onto this party for a guy named Udi, and he encouraged me to photograph the festivities, that passed me the communal bottle of arak. So, l'chaim Udi. Street singers in Yaffo. Young women were singing for shekels, and I like the way the elements of this scene fall together, with everything frozen for an instant in time. The singers in the foreground, the woman with her daughter watching them, and the man in the background having tefillin put on. Next, please. This is Sado. He is a 7th generation Palestinian Arab fisherman whose family has been fishing out of Yaffo for 150 years, since the Turks ran the place. While I was photographing him, I couldn't help thinking of Jonah, who must have gotten onto a ship for his rendezvous with the whale somewhere close to where we were standing. In many of the train stations in Israel, there are pianos just sitting there for people to play. And a variety of piano players seem to be there. Some of them playing horribly with 2 fingers, and some of them actually quite good. So, as I mentioned, Haifa, which is where I first landed in Israel in the late 1970s, has a sort of special place in my thoughts. I spent 6 months there with the new immigrants, the Russians who I mentioned. And when I went to Haifa for the first time after nearly 30 years in 2013, I wanted to see what the neighborhood looked like after all that time. While virtually every other place in Israel was modern, beautiful, Bat Galim in Haifa was still sort of the dump that I remembered from all those years before. But I'm told that in more recent years, there's been a lot of construction there. It's apparently prime affordable real estate now in Israel, in case anybody's thinking of investing. So my companion has known the former mayor of Haifa, Yoni Yahav, for many years. And on one of our earlier trips, he was nice enough to organize a car and driver and guide for us, and took us around the city. And developed so much since I'd first been there. And we were shown all sorts of improvements, civic improvements that had been made under the mayor's 3 terms. So one of them was where the municipality of Haifa put exercise machines on the beach so that the citizens could improve their figures. So, another wonder of Haifa that was pointed out was the most famous potato seller. Our guide on that trip insisted on introducing us to the man who was the most famous potato seller in all of Israel. People came from all over the country to buy this guy's potatoes. I'm no expert, but they look like potatoes to me. But I thought only in Israel, in a country of high technology and Nobel Prize winners, would there also be a place for a distinguished potato seller. This woman is in the Arab sector. Haifa is an interesting city. It's quite has a very large Arab population as well as Jewish population. And according to the mayor, they all more or less get along. And this is in the Arab market section of Haifa. About 5 years earlier, I saw this woman probably dressed exactly the same, in the same spot, peeling whatever vegetables those are. And the second time I saw her, I figured it was Bashir. She was put there for me to photograph. So I took this picture and added her to the collection. So that's all. This gentleman is a sandlar, a shoemaker. I needed a repair on one of my shoes, so we were directed to a sandlar's shop on the Carmel. He and I chatted while I waited for the glue to dry on my shoe, and he kept working on other repairs. He was very proud of his 100-year-old foot treadle operated sewing machine that he kept in beautiful shape and used every day. So I could say, to get back to Yoni Yahav, the mayor of Haifa, on one of our trips when he was still in office, we went to visit him. We were invited for coffee with the mayor, and just waltzed into the city hall, the municipal building of Haifa. The security guard didn't ask for ID, didn't check bags or my camera bag or anything. And he just said, yeah, 3rd floor, 2nd door on the right is the mayor's office. So we were sitting there having coffee, and I said, Mayor Yahav, there was no security. Nobody said anything. Nobody asked who we were, why we wanted to see the mayor of Haifa. And Mayor Yahav laughed at me. He said, well, who wants to kill me in Haifa except maybe my wife? So from there, we moved to other places in Israel. And a friend from Jerusalem told us that we had to see the market in Ramah. And we went there one morning. This was a sprawling, chaotic outdoor bazaar with wares of all sorts, just strewn all over the place, live animals, all kinds of things. And as I was walking through a section of clothing stalls, I saw this woman covered head to foot in her burqa, fishing around in her purse for something or other. This is what I call a classic Leica picture, that only with a very quiet, unobtrusive machine could I have gotten a picture like this without calling attention to myself. So, and I suspect that attention would not have been welcome. So that's, next one, please. In Beersheba, we needed to make a pit stop while driving through Beersheba, and our driver suggested that the mall, Canyon in Hebrew, as they call them, would have the nicest facilities. I saw this guy with his automatic rifle over his shoulder in a women's clothing store, probably waiting for somebody to try something on. And it brought me back to the reality of life in Israel, that you can be in a nice, modern, glittering shopping mall and still need to carry your M4 carbine over your shoulder. So next one, please. Zikron Yaakov. During the week of Sukkot in Israel, it's a non-stop festival that often spills into the streets, and the clown musicians and the Orthodox folks holding the lulav and metro were all part of the spectacle. Next one. This is Sfat. I'd wanted to see Sfat on several trips, but somehow it never worked out. And finally, in 2018, I was able to visit the city. It's an up and down sort of city with multiple levels connected by these steep stairways. One of the people we met said that nobody living in Sfat needs a stair stepper machine for exercise, as this picture shows. Wait.
Okay, sorry.
Most of my Israel photography has been in cities and settled areas. And prior to the last trip, the pre-pandemic one, I'd only been to one working kibbutz in the northern Negev desert. But in 2019, we made plans to stay with friends on kibbutz Grofit, which is deep in the Aravad desert, almost to the southern tip of Israel. The Aravad desert looks like a lunar landscape, just dotted with places where agricultural settlements, kibbutzim, moshavim, where there are green spots, and temperatures will run up to 120 degrees in the summer. When we got there, Grofit had just closed its swimming pool because the fall temperatures didn't get much above 90. So it was too cool for the kibbutzniks to swim. Grofit raises cows and chickens and has extensive date orchards that go right down to the border with Jordan. And I photographed this cow, this Israeli cow that was curious and came right up to me. And looking at her with that sweet bovine face, I began to feel somewhat guilty for occasionally eating red meat. But our host set me straight. He said that if I'd ever actually been around cows or worked with them, not only would I not feel guilty about eating beef, but I would consider it justifiable revenge. Apparently, cows can be treacherous animals that are known to crush or trample the people who work with them. So the other big industry, or one of the other big industries at Kibbutz Grofit, is date picking. And that's a highly mechanized operation for harvesting dates. And a cherry picker platform goes to the top of the trees. They cut down the branches, the dates, the branches with dates on them fall into a hopper, and then the whole sequence moves on to the next set of trees. And then when the dates land in the hopper, they are sorted by hand. It's like a mechanical ballet almost to watch this successively move down the lines of trees. Good?
Yeah.
And on Kibbutz Keturah, Keturah is an interesting place. It's an agricultural research center where they develop strains of various things that can grow in the brackish water that comes up the artesian wells in the desert there. And this kibbutz has also expanded to a microbrewery. And this gentleman was the proud brewer. So until that trip to the Arava Desert, the furthest south that I've been in Israel was the Negev Desert. So this photo was taken at Kibbutz Urim in the northern Negev in their cow milking facility. And milking was a tremendously efficient process. The cows were let in, hooked up to the milking apparatus, and then herded back out when the milking was finished. They were perfectly docile, well behaved. And my companion decided to join me in the pit below the cows where they were being milked, despite my repeated warnings to her that hanging out with a photographer can be kind of a dangerous enterprise. And a few minutes after this picture was taken, one of the cows lifted its tail and how can I say this to an educated, cultured group like yourselves, sprayed fecal matter all over her from head to toe. Fortunately, she survived, only a bit worse for wear. Yes, and here she is in the audience. So she survived, the relationship survived, so we all moved on. And at the end of the trip in 2014, we were driving up to Tel Aviv from the south, from the Negev, and I'm not really interested at all in photographing the landscape. I'm pretty much entirely a people photographer. So I figured that my work for the trip was finished. It was just this sort of dry landscape going on. And then we came around a bend in the road, and there was a mini rock festival, sort of a Woodstock in the desert. This was in October of 2014, only a few months after the Gaza war. So here were these hundreds of kids in the desert, listening to music, set up their tents. And I spent the next few hours there photographing. They were very nice. They were camped out. They offered us food as we walked by. And it brings home the resiliency of life in Israel. Here it is a few months after war, and 2 miles away from the border with Gaza is a rock concert. So, and after the rock concert, I figured that I was really finished with photography for the trip, and I could just relax on the way back up to Tel Aviv. Our guide decided that we just had to see a restored Ottoman police fort that had at one time guarded the road between Beersheba and Gaza. I wasn't really interested, but it seemed pretty harmless, a police fort. And then on the terrace of it, I noticed this very pregnant woman who was having her maternity pictures taken. And my companion is a fluent Hebrew speaker. So I said, I want a picture of her. So she went over, and fortunately the young woman was amenable and I could photograph her. And I like the contrast in this picture between the arid, sort of largely empty desert behind her and a new life about to come into Israel. I had some trouble with this picture when I wanted to include it in an exhibit several years back. It was objected to as being unsuitable for a gallery in a Hillel center, their dining area. where college-age students might see it. I couldn't see the objection. I figured that by the time kids got to college, they probably knew where babies came from. So I was angry at this censorship, and I insisted that either she stayed or I just pulled the whole exhibit. However, when I calmed down a bit, I realized that I had something as an alternative that maybe they'd like better in the dining hall. There's a picture in one of the markets in Jerusalem with lamb carcasses hanging with flies on them, and a guy sitting underneath one of the carcasses smoking. So in the end, they relented and let me keep her in the show. So these prints, I wish I had the actual black and white darkroom prints here, because this is nice. Certainly the scans show the work off, but the actual prints that you can put your nose up against are really very pretty. And they've been on quite a journey over the last 5 or 6 years, both the East and West coasts and Midwest, obviously, as well as the Southwest. And a parallel collection of these was displayed at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, and then at a synagogue, at 2 synagogues in France, in Nice and Paris. And tell you a little bit about the way I tend to work in projects. I find something that holds my attention for a period of time, and then just sort of work through it. And I worked with this. I brought along one of my ancient Leicas that I'll show you. This is this is actually the newest camera that I own. I bought this from somebody who'd gone completely digital and said, I have this old Leica at the back of my closet. I'll never use it again. And because it had been sitting for about 20 years, I had the camera completely overhauled. So it's because they didn't know how to make things that were disposable back then. This is essentially a brand new camera. The reason I like it, aside from it's a beautiful object and it works well, is that this is unlike most of the cameras you see photojournalists and others using.
Okay, I just want
okay.
them to see you.
Okay, no, they as well they should. As I was sorry, it's a very quiet, discreet machine. This is what the shutter sounds like. It's just a very in a noisy modern world. This is invisible, and oddly enough, the photographer becomes invisible after a while. So that's why I like using this. So, and I still, even in the age of digital, use black and white film that I process and print myself almost entirely, 99.9%. And one of the, aside from it's taken me 40 some years to get to the point of doing photography and printing that really satisfies me, that silver-based photography, the bits of silver being sensitized to light, is the only medium so far with a several hundred-year archival life. So if I don't live forever, these images will go into archives and will show a slice of time in Israel, as obviously other places where I've been photographing. With darkroom printed photographs, each one is a slightly unique handmade object that can never be duplicated precisely, which is also a large part of the beauty of the traditional work. When I worked at one point until I retired as a photographer for an agency of the city of New York. And I would sometimes bring one of the Leicas along with me when I thought there would be something interesting other than the propaganda photography that I was doing. And people would ask me,
We'll get the
You're the
microphone
next
around to you
customer.
next
Is
time.
there somebody in there?
Well, I actually think you answered this by this beautiful photograph.
Well,
but
thank
what
you.
drew you to Israel? Is that your sole source of photography?
No, Israel is one of the photography, or my photography is like a juggler with balls in the air. Israel is one of my my projects. During I've done a lot of different things. The last few years, I've been photographing the pandemic in New York. More recently, I just started photographing the rallies for Ukraine. And then whenever there's anything either pro or anti-Israel in New York, I'll be out in the street. So this is one of my several projects that I keep in the hopper. So there was another someone. Yeah, this. Wait, microphone is coming.
Was wondering, with your small Leica, are you able to zoom at all?
It's the Leica is pre-zoom. It's got a fixed 35mm lens, which is moderately wide angle, slightly wider than sort of normal vision. So it takes in a little bit more, but it's sort of what human vision looks like. So I like that, and like any other tool, like any other medium, it has its limitations, but you learn to live with them. So that's
Wonder how readily available film is these days.
well, nothing ever really disappears. You know, not film, not anti-Semitism, not that it's. I can think offhand of 3 places in New York City and 2 places out of the city that ship to me. So it's, you know, like many things, you give them a credit card and it arrives. So film, chemicals, I probably would draw the line at coating my own glass plates as they did during the Civil War. But as long as film is available, I will keep shooting it. This Leica was designed to last forever, designed to outlast me. Question? Any other? Yes.
Let me ask the obvious.
Wait for the microphone.
Why black and white?
Well, the simple answer is because I love it as a medium, and for documentary work, for my documentary work, I can't make a blanket statement for anybody else. It strips down everything to the essentials. So there are no distracting colors. You just see angles and shapes and shadows. And it's also because all photography is a distortion of reality. This moves you further from the scene reality that we have. So you have to look at it in a different way. So that's it. Plus, as I said, I like the whole process. So any other customers? Well, in that case, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I just want,
Yeah,
I'll switch
would you
you
like
over
to-
here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good to see everyone. Our next adult enrichment will be with Rabbi Sarada on June 12th, and it's about the 67th Psalm. We are still in the counting of the Omers, throughout the Omer. If you want to bring us cereal boxes, we appreciate that. And if you haven't seen our cereal pyramid in the sanctuary, it's worth it to go take a look. And it's wonderful to see everyone. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Wait, let's see. I think people have some. Okay. No, okay, you're good. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
I'll give you a little irony here. I have a cousin in Beersheba that does what you do, but he makes a trip to Japan every year to do his